I stood in my kitchen at 6 in the morning, staring at the coffee maker and wondering when my life had become something I didn't recognize. The house was quiet, except for the familiar sounds drifting up from the basement: running water, footsteps, the soft murmur of someone talking on the phone. Someone who wasn't supposed to be there. Someone who had no business making herself comfortable in what was supposed to be my home. My husband David thought I was being unreasonable. He'd made that clear yesterday when I'd suggested, as gently as possible, that maybe his ex-wife Emma had stayed long enough. 3 months, I'd said. 3 months was generous for someone who was supposed to be getting back on her feet. David had looked at me like I'd suggested we throw a wounded puppy into traffic. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. She needs support, Melissa, he'd said, using that patient tone that made me feel like a selfish child. Emma's been through a lot. We can't just abandon her when she's vulnerable. Vulnerable. That was David's favorite word when it came to his ex-wife. Emma was vulnerable when her second marriage fell apart, vulnerable when she lost her job, vulnerable when she needed a place to stay while she figured things out. Always vulnerable, never accountable, never asked to actually figure anything out beyond how to make herself comfortable in my basement. I poured my coffee and tried to shake off the resentment that had become my constant companion. This wasn't who I wanted to be. I'd never been the jealous type, never been the woman who saw threats where there weren't any, but something about this situation felt wrong in ways I couldn't articulate without sounding petty. The basement door opened and Emma appeared, padding into my kitchen in silk pajamas that probably cost more than my entire sleepwear collection. Even first thing in the morning, she looked effortlessly put together. Her blonde hair fell in perfect waves. Her skin had that dewy glow that came from expensive skincare routines, and somehow she managed to make pajamas look like they belonged on a magazine cover. "Morning, Mel," she said, heading straight for the coffee maker like she owned the place. She'd started calling me Mel a few weeks ago, this casual nickname that David used, as if we were old friends instead of two women sharing a house out of necessity. "Sleep well." "Fine," I said, stepping aside to give her access to the coffee. I hated how she made me feel like a guest in my own kitchen, how she moved through the space with more confidence than I'd ever managed. "David's already up and getting ready," she said, pouring herself a generous cup. "He mentioned something about an early meeting today. Poor thing works so hard. Poor thing." The casual intimacy of it made my stomach clench. She talked about my husband like she still had a claim to him, like their history gave her special insight into his needs and struggles. And maybe it did. After all, they'd been married for 8 years. I'd only been Mrs. Patterson for 2. "He does work hard," I agreed, keeping my voice neutral. There was no point in engaging. Emma had a way of turning every conversation into a reminder of how well she knew David, how much history they shared, how integral she'd been to his life long before I came along. Emma leaned against the counter, cradling her coffee cup like she was posing for a lifestyle blog. "You know, Mel, I really appreciate everything you're doing. Letting me stay here while I get back on my feet. It means the world to me, and I know David appreciates it too." The gratitude felt performative. A script she'd perfected to make me feel guilty for wanting her gone. She was good at this, good at positioning herself as the grateful guest while somehow making me feel like the intruder. It was a skill I envied and resented in equal measure. "Of course," I said, because what else could I say? David had made the decision to invite her, and I'd gone along with it because I loved him and wanted to be supportive. 3 months ago, that had seemed reasonable. Now it felt like the biggest mistake of my marriage. David appeared in the doorway, already dressed in his navy suit, his dark hair still damp from the shower. At 35, he had the kind of steady handsomeness that aged well, the kind of face that inspired trust in boardrooms and confidence in his patience. He was a good man, a kind man. Oh! Which was why this situation was so complicated. His kindness was one of the things I'd fallen in love with, but it was also becoming the thing that was tearing us apart. "Ladies," he said, smiling at both of us, with the same warm expression. "Emma, did you sleep okay? I thought I heard you moving around late last night." I watched Emma's face light up at his attention. "Oh, you know me. I've always been a restless sleeper. Remember how I used to keep you awake when we were married?" The casual reference to their marriage hit me like a slap. She did this constantly. These little reminders of their shared past, their intimate knowledge of each other's habits and quirks. David didn't seem to notice, but I caught every single one. I remember David said with a fond smile that made my chest tighten. Maybe we should look into getting you some melatonin or something. That's sweet of you to worry, Emma said, and the way she said it with that soft, grateful tone made it sound like he was still her husband instead of mine. I busied myself with making toast, anything to avoid watching this exchange. 3 months of this. 3 months of feeling like a third wheel in my own marriage, of watching my husband care for his ex-wife, with the same tenderness he'd once reserved for me. Melissa, what are your plans today? David asked, and I could hear him trying to include me in the conversation. I have a client meeting at 10, I said. I ran a small interior design business from home, which had seemed like a dream come true when David and I got married. Now it meant I was trapped in the house with Emma more often than not. Then I was thinking about finally organizing the garage. The garage can wait, Emma chimed in. David, didn't you mention wanting to clean that out months ago? Maybe we could tackle it together this weekend, like we used to do with the house projects. Like they were still a team, still a unit that worked together on domestic tasks. I gripped my coffee mug tighter, feeling that familiar surge of frustration and helplessness. That's a great idea, David said, oblivious to the way Emma was casually inserting herself into our weekend plans. We could make a day of it, order pizza, maybe get through some of those boxes we've been meaning to sort through. I wanted to scream. Those were our boxes, our plans, our weekend. But Emma had a way of making everything about us become about them, and David never seemed to notice. I should get going, David said, checking his watch. Traffic's going to be murder. He kissed my cheek, a quick, distracted peck that felt more like an obligation than affection. Have a good day, babe. You too, I said, watching him grab his briefcase and head for the door. Drive safe, Emma called after him, and he turned back to give her a warm smile. Always do. Thanks, Emma. Another casual intimacy that excluded me completely. After David left, the house felt smaller somehow, like Emma's presence expanded to fill every available space. I finished my coffee quickly, eager to escape to my office and prepare for my client meeting. But as I turned to leave, Emma's voice stopped me. Mel, can we talk for a minute? I turned back reluctantly. Emma had settled into one of the kitchen chairs, looking serious in a way that immediately put me on edge. What about? I just wanted to clear the air about something. I know this situation isn't easy for you, having me here. I can sense some tension, and I want you to know that's the last thing I want. Her voice was sincere, concerned, like she genuinely cared about my comfort. It was masterfully done, putting the burden on me to either confirm her suspicions and look petty, or deny them and pretend everything was fine. I'm fine, I said, which was obviously a lie, but what choice did I have? Are you sure? Because I've been thinking maybe I should look for somewhere else to stay. I don't want to overstay my welcome. It was a trap, and we both knew it. If I agreed, I'd look heartless. If I insisted she stay, I'd be trapped for even longer. Emma was good at this game, better than I'd ever be. David wants you here, I said, finally. Your family. Family. The word tasted bitter in my mouth. Emma smiled, but there was something calculating in her eyes. That's exactly what I was hoping you'd say. David and I, we have such a strong foundation of friendship. It's so important to both of us that you feel comfortable with that. Strong foundation of friendship. Right. I nodded and mumbled something about needing to get ready for my meeting, then escaped to my office before I said something I'd regret. My office was the one space in the house that felt entirely mine. I'd decorated it myself, choosing calming blues and whites, filling it with plants and photographs that made me happy. It was supposed to be my sanctuary, but even here I could feel Emma's presence seeping through the floorboards. I tried to focus on preparing for my client presentation, but my mind kept wandering. When had things started feeling so wrong? Emma had moved in 3 months ago, all tears and gratitude and promises that it would just be temporary.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story.
She'd lost her job, she'd said. Her second husband had turned out to be financially irresponsible and emotionally abusive. She needed time to get back on her feet, to figure out her next steps. David had been adamant that we help her. She has nobody else, he'd said. Her family lives across the country and she doesn't have the kind of money for a deposit on an apartment right now. It's just temporary, Melissa. A few weeks at most. A few weeks had turned into a month, then 2, now 3. And instead of getting back on her feet, Emma seemed to be getting more comfortable. She'd stopped looking for jobs after the first month, claiming she needed time to heal from her trauma. She'd stopped talking about finding an apartment, instead making comments about how nice it was to have a support system again. My phone buzzed with a text from my best friend Sarah. Coffee later. I need to hear how domestic bliss is treating you. I stared at the message, trying to figure out how to respond. How could I explain that domestic bliss was the last thing I was experiencing, that my marriage felt like it was slowly dissolving under the weight of my husband's misplaced loyalty to his ex-wife? Instead, I typed back, rain check, busy day. It was easier than trying to explain something I didn't fully understand myself. My client meeting went well. A young couple looking to renovate their first home. Their excitement was infectious, their obvious love for each other a reminder of what David and I used to have. When they talked about their plans, their future, their dreams for the space, I felt a pang of loss so sharp it nearly brought tears to my eyes. That used to be David and me. We used to plan our future together, talk about the life we were building. Now our conversations revolved around Emma's needs, Emma's progress, Emma's comfort. Our own relationship had become secondary to managing the delicate ecosystem of having his ex-wife living in our basement. I drove home slowly, dreading the return to a house that no longer felt like mine. As I pulled into the driveway, I noticed Emma's car was gone. A surge of relief washed over me. Maybe I'd have a few hours of peace, a few hours to exist in my own space without feeling like an intruder. But as I walked through the front door, I could hear voices coming from the living room. David's voice, and Emma's, talking quietly like conspirators. David wasn't supposed to be home for hours. What was he doing here? I set down my purse and walked toward the living room, my footsteps silent on the hardwood floors. They were sitting close together on the couch, closer than they needed to be for a casual conversation. Emma had her hand on David's arm, her face turned toward his with an expression of intense concern. I just don't want her to feel uncomfortable, Emma was saying. Maybe I should start looking for somewhere else to stay. No, David said firmly. You're not going anywhere. Melissa's just adjusting. She'll come around. Are you sure? I can see how she looks at me sometimes. I think she sees me as a threat. David's laugh was gentle, affectionate. That's ridiculous. Melissa's not like that. She's just protective of our space, which is natural. But she knows you're important to me. She knows we have history that can't just be erased. History that can't just be erased. The words hit me like a physical blow. I stood frozen in the hallway, listening to my husband reassure his ex-wife that she was important to him, that their history mattered more than my comfort in my own home. I just feel so grateful, Emma said, and her voice had that vulnerable quality that David always responded to. You saved me, David. When everything fell apart with Marcus, when I had nowhere else to turn, you were there, just like you always were. That's what friends do, David said. But his voice was softer now, more intimate. We were always more than friends, though, weren't we? Even after the divorce, even after everything that happened between us. There was a long pause, and I held my breath, waiting for David to correct her, to remind her that he was married now, that whatever they'd had was in the past. Instead he sighed. Emma, you know this is complicated. I know, I'm not trying to make things difficult for you. I just want you to know that these months here, feeling like a family again, it's meant everything to me. Feeling like a family again. The words echoed in my head, each one a knife twist of betrayal. I backed away from the living room, my heart pounding so loudly I was sure they'd hear it. I made it to the kitchen before the tears started, hot and angry and overwhelming. How long had they been having these conversations? How many times had David come home early to spend time with Emma while I was out working? How many intimate moments had they shared while I was upstairs in my office, believing that my husband was at work and his ex-wife was looking for jobs? I grabbed a tissue and tried to pull myself together. I couldn't let them know I'd overheard. Not yet. I needed time to think, to process what I'd heard, to figure out what it meant. The front door opened and closed, and I heard Emma's voice, calling out a goodbye. A few minutes later, David appeared in the kitchen, looking slightly flustered. "Hey babe," he said, not quite meeting my eyes. "How was your meeting?" "Good." I managed keeping my voice steady. "What are you doing home so early?" "I had a cancellation, thought I'd come home and check on Emma. She seemed a little down this morning." The lie came so easily to him. Not the truth, which was that he'd come home to have an intimate conversation with his ex-wife about their relationship and her place in his life. Just a simple caring gesture that painted me as the unreasonable one for questioning it. "That's nice of you," I said, and I could hear the edge in my own voice. David frowned. "Is everything okay? You seem upset." "I'm fine," I said. The same lie I'd been telling for months. "Melissa, if something's bothering you, we should talk about it." The irony was overwhelming. He wanted to talk about what was bothering me while keeping secrets about his private conversations with Emma. He wanted honesty from me while offering none in return. I said I'm fine. David studied my face for a moment, then nodded. "Okay, well, I should get back to the office. I just wanted to check in." Check in, like I was another person on his list of responsibilities, another box to tick off between Emma and his actual life. After he left, I sat at the kitchen table and tried to make sense of what I'd heard. The words played on repeat in my mind, each one carrying weight I didn't want to acknowledge. Emma talking about feeling like a family again. David saying their history couldn't be erased. The casual intimacy of their conversation, the way they'd sat together like old lovers catching up. I'd been telling myself that David was just being kind, that his concern for Emma was purely platonic. But what I'd heard suggested something deeper, something that threatened everything I thought I knew about my marriage. My phone rang, jarring me out of my thoughts. Sarah's name appeared on the screen. "Hey," I answered, trying to sound normal. "Okay. What's wrong?" Sarah asked immediately. "You've been dodging my calls for weeks, and your text today was weird. What's going on?" Sarah had been my best friend since college. She knew me well enough to hear the distress I was trying to hide. "Nothing's wrong," I started, but Sarah cut me off. "Bullshit. Talk to me, Mel. What's happening?" The nickname hit me wrong, reminding me of Emma's casual use of it. Everything reminded me of Emma now, even my oldest friendships. "David's ex-wife is staying with us," I said finally. "What, since when?" 3 months ago. She needed a place to stay while she got back on her feet. There was a long pause. 3 months. "Melissa, why didn't you tell me?" "Because I knew how it would sound. I knew you'd think I was crazy for agreeing to it." "I think you're crazy for not telling me about it." "How are you handling this?" "I'm not," I admitted, and saying it out loud made it feel more real. "Sarah, I think I'm losing my mind. She's always there, always perfect, always reminding David of their history together, and he just enables it. He defends her, protects her, makes me feel like I'm the problem for being uncomfortable." "This is insane," Sarah said. "Who the hell moves their ex-wife into their house with their current wife, and who agrees to it?" "Someone who loves their husband and trusts him," I said weakly. "Someone who's being taken advantage of," Sarah corrected. "Melissa, this isn't normal. This isn't healthy. You have to know that." I did know that. Deep down, I'd known it from the beginning. But David had made it seem reasonable, necessary, temporary. He'd made me feel selfish for objecting, unreasonable for being uncomfortable. "I don't know what to do," I said. "If I push too hard, I'll look like the jealous, insecure wife. If I don't push at all, this becomes my life forever." "Have you tried talking to David about setting boundaries? About giving Emma a timeline to move out?" "He always has an excuse. She's not ready, she's still healing, she needs more time." And then Emma does this thing where she offers to leave, which makes me look heartless if I agree. She sounds manipulative as hell. That's what I keep thinking, but then I wonder if I'm just being paranoid. Maybe I am the problem. Maybe I'm just not secure enough in my marriage to handle this. "Stop," Sarah said firmly. "Don't gaslight yourself. Your instincts are telling you something's wrong because something is wrong. Trust yourself." After I hung up with Sarah, I felt both better and worse. Better because someone had validated my feelings. Worse because she'd confirmed what I'd been afraid to admit. This situation wasn't normal. It wasn't healthy, and it wasn't going to resolve itself. I spent the rest of the afternoon trying to focus on work, but my mind kept drifting to David and Emma's conversation, the way she'd talked about feeling like a family again, the way he'd said their history couldn't be erased, the casual intimacy between them, the shared memories, the obvious comfort they found in each other's presence. When David came home that evening, he seemed distracted, distant. He kissed my cheek absently, and immediately asked where Emma was. "I think she went out with friends," I said, though I hadn't seen her leave. "Good for her," David said. "She needs to get out more, start building a social network again." Everything came back to Emma, her needs, her healing, her progress. When was the last time David had asked about my day with genuine interest? When was the last time he'd been concerned about my social life or my happiness? We ate dinner in relative silence, David checking his phone frequently. When it buzzed with a text, his face lit up in a way it hadn't when he'd come home to me. "Emma," he said, answering my unasked question. "She's having a good time with her friends. She sent a picture." He showed me his phone, and there was Emma, radiant and laughing, surrounded by a group of attractive people at what looked like an upscale bar. She looked like she was thriving, not like someone who needed support and shelter. "She looks happy," I said carefully. "She does. It's good to see her getting back to herself." Getting back to herself. As if the woman living in our basement, the one who padded around in silk pajamas and had intimate conversations with my husband, wasn't her real self. As if there was another version of Emma, a better version, that David was helping to restore. That night, as I lay in bed listening to David sleep peacefully beside me, I heard the familiar sounds from the basement. Emma had come home, and she was moving around down there, talking on the phone in a voice too low for me to make out words but loud enough to remind me of her presence. I stared at the ceiling and tried to remember the last time I'd felt truly happy in my own home. The last time I'd felt like David's priority, like his wife instead of just another person in his life who needed managing. The last time I'd felt secure in my marriage instead of constantly on edge, waiting for the next reminder of his history with Emma. 3 months. 3 months of this slow erosion of my marriage, my confidence, my sense of home. 3 months of being made to feel unreasonable for wanting my husband's ex-wife out of my house. 3 months of watching David light up for Emma in ways he no longer did for me. I closed my eyes and tried to imagine a future where this ended well, where Emma moved out and David and I rebuilt what we'd had. But all I could see was more of the same, more excuses, more delays, more reasons why Emma needed to stay, more conversations about her healing, her progress, her needs. And somewhere in the darkness, I admitted something I'd been avoiding for weeks. This wasn't just about Emma overstaying her welcome, this was about David choosing her over me, again and again in ways both big and small. This was about my marriage slowly dissolving, while I pretended everything was fine. Tomorrow, I decided, I would start looking for answers. I would stop being the accommodating wife and start being the woman who demanded truth. Because whatever was happening in my house, whatever was growing between David and Emma, I deserved to know about it. I deserved better than this half-life I'd been living, always wondering, always doubting, always feeling like an outsider in my own marriage. The house settled around me, creaking and sighing like it was keeping secrets too. And maybe it was. Maybe these walls had witnessed things I didn't want to imagine, conversations I hadn't overheard, moments between David and Emma that would shatter what little faith I had left. But I was done being afraid of the truth. Whatever it was, whatever it meant for my marriage, I needed to know, because living in uncertainty was killing me slowly, and I refused to disappear quietly while my husband and his ex-wife rebuilt their family in my basement. The next morning, I waited until David left for work before making my move. Emma was still asleep downstairs, or at least quiet enough that I could pretend she was. I needed to understand what was really happening in my own house, and that meant doing some investigating of my own. I started with David's home office, a space I'd always respected as his private domain. The door was usually closed, but this morning I turned the handle with trembling fingers. Inside, everything was meticulously organized. David had always been neat, almost obsessively so, Files were labeled and sorted, his desk clear, except for his computer and a few essential items. I sat in his leather chair and opened the laptop. It required a password, which I knew. We'd shared everything when we first got married, back when trust came easily and secrets seemed unnecessary. His password was still the same, a combination of our wedding date and my middle name. The fact that he hadn't changed it should have been reassuring, but instead it felt naive. Maybe he simply hadn't thought I'd ever look. His email was the first thing I checked. Most of it was work-related, but scattered throughout were messages to and from Emma. I scrolled through them, my heart sinking with each exchange. They weren't explicitly romantic, but there was an intimacy there that made my stomach churn. Inside jokes, shared memories, casual references to things I knew nothing about. One email from 2 weeks ago caught my attention. Emma had written about a dream she'd had, something about their old apartment, and how safe she'd felt there. David's response was gentle, almost tender. He told her that she was safe now, that he would always make sure she was protected. He signed it always D in a way that felt like a promise, like a vow. I kept scrolling, looking for something more concrete, more damning. What I found instead was worse in its subtlety. Hundreds of small intimacies, tiny betrayals that added up to something larger. David caring for Emma's emotional needs, in ways he no longer cared for mine. David being the husband to Emma, that he'd stopped being to me. My hands were shaking as I opened his browser history. I told myself I was looking for evidence of infidelity, something obvious like dating sites or hotel bookings. Instead, I found searches that painted a different picture. Articles about helping trauma survivors, information about codependency, forums about maintaining friendships with ex-spouses. But then I found something that made my blood run cold. A search from last week for uncontested divorce proceedings. My name wasn't in the search terms. Emma's was. I stared at the screen, trying to process what I was seeing. David had been researching divorce information, but not for himself and me. He'd been looking into how to help Emma finalize her divorce from Marcus, her second husband. The search history showed he'd spent over an hour reading about divorce procedures, about protecting assets, about maintaining spousal support. I printed out the search history and several of the most intimate emails, my hands moving automatically while my mind reblolled. This wasn't just about David helping a friend. This was about David taking an active role in untangling Emma's life, in freeing her from her current marriage so she could move forward. The question was, move forward to what? I heard movement from downstairs, and quickly closed everything, shutting down the computer and returning the office to its pristine state. By the time Emma appeared in the kitchen, I was sitting at the table with my coffee, the printed pages hidden in a folder beside me. "Morning, Mel," Emma said, and today her smile seemed different somehow, more knowing, more confident. "You're up early." "Couldn't sleep," I said, which was true. I'd been awake since 4, my mind churning with everything I'd overheard yesterday. Emma poured herself coffee and settled across from me. She was wearing one of David's old college t-shirts, something I'd never seen before. It was faded and soft, the kind of shirt that spoke of shared history and casual intimacy. "That's David's shirt," I said, before I could stop myself. Emma looked down at herself, then back at me with that same knowing smile. "Oh, this old thing. I found it in the laundry room. I hope you don't mind. My pajamas were all dirty, and David said it was fine." David said it was fine. Of course he had. Another small boundary crossed, another piece of our marriage given away without my consent. "I should probably get my own laundry caught up," Emma continued. "I've been so disorganized lately. It's hard to get motivated when you're going through emotional turmoil." Emotional turmoil. Emma had a way of making her problems sound both serious and vague, requiring sympathy without offering specifics. I'd noticed this pattern before, but today it felt more calculated. "How's the job search going?" I asked, testing to see if she'd stick to the story she'd been telling David. Emma's expression shifted slightly, becoming more guarded. "It's challenging. The market is so competitive right now, and with everything I've been through with Marcus, it's hard to focus on interviews and applications." "What kind of work are you looking for exactly?" "Oh, marketing, communications, that sort of thing. I have a lot of experience, but it's been a while since I was in the workforce." Her answers were vague, non-committal. I realized I'd never seen her actually applying for jobs, never seen her dressed for interviews, or stressed about applications. For someone who'd been job hunting for 3 months, she seemed remarkably relaxed about it. Maybe I could help, I offered. I know some people in marketing through my design work. That's so sweet of you, Emma said, but her tone suggested she wasn't interested. I think I need to handle this myself, though. It's part of my healing process. You know, learning to be independent again. Learning to be independent while living rent-free in someone else's house. The contradiction was so obvious, I wondered how I'd missed it before. After Emma disappeared back downstairs, I called Sarah. I needed to talk to someone, needed to process what I'd discovered without going crazy. She's wearing his clothes now, I said. As soon as Sarah answered, "Good morning to you too," Sarah said dryly. "And what do you mean wearing his clothes?" Emma, she was wearing one of David's old t-shirts this morning, said she found it in the laundry room, and that David told her it was fine. That's not okay. That's not normal houseguest behavior. Nothing about this situation is normal, I said. Sarah, I found something. I told her about David's email exchanges with Emma, about the searches for divorce information. Sarah listened without interrupting, but I could hear her getting more agitated as I talked. "Melissa, this is really bad," she said when I finished. "This sounds like emotional affair territory at minimum, and the fact that he's helping her with her divorce, while hiding it from you, that's crossing major lines." "But it could be innocent," I said, even though I didn't believe it. "Maybe he's just being helpful." Helpful would be giving her the name of a good lawyer. What you're describing is intimate involvement in her personal life. That's not appropriate for a married man. I knew Sarah was right, but admitting it meant admitting that my marriage was in serious trouble. It meant acknowledging that the man I'd loved and trusted had been betraying that trust in ways I was only beginning to understand. "What should I do?" "You need more information," Sarah said. "You need to understand the full scope of what's happening before you confront anyone. Can you get into his phone?" "I don't know his passcode." "What about credit card statements, bank records? If something physical is happening, there might be charges you don't know about." After we hung up, I spent the rest of the morning going through our financial records. David handled most of our joint finances, but I had access to the accounts. What I found made my stomach drop even further. There were charges I didn't recognize, dinners at restaurants I'd never been to, charges from a spa in the city, purchases at stores that sold women's clothing. All recent, all during times when David had claimed to be working late or meeting with clients. But the most damning discovery was a charge from 3 days ago at a jewelry store downtown, $800, which was more than David had ever spent on jewelry for me. The timing coincided with one of his supposed late meetings, and I had a sick feeling I knew who the jewelry was for. I printed everything out and added it to my growing file of evidence. Each piece of paper felt like another nail in the coffin of my marriage, but I needed to know the truth. I needed to understand what I was really dealing with. That afternoon, I did something I'd never done before. I followed David. He'd told me he had meetings until 6, but the financial records suggested he might not be where he claimed to be. I parked across the street from his office building and waited. At 4:30, David emerged and got into his car. Instead of heading home or to another business location, he drove to the upscale part of town, to a small boutique hotel I recognized from the credit card statements. My heart was pounding as I watched him park and walk into the lobby. He moved with purpose, like someone who knew exactly where he was going, like someone who'd been there before. I waited in my car for 20 minutes, watching the entrance, hoping against hope that he'd emerge with a rational explanation. Maybe he was meeting a client there. Maybe there was a business reason for him to be in a hotel in the middle of the afternoon. Then I saw Emma. She approached the hotel from the opposite direction, walking quickly but casually, like she belonged there. She was dressed differently than she'd been that morning, more elegantly, in a dress I'd never seen before. She looked like she was going to a date, not meeting a friend for support and conversation. I watched her disappear into the same entrance David had used, and I sat in my car feeling like my world was collapsing around me. This wasn't innocent. This wasn't just emotional support between old friends. This was an affair, conducted with my knowledge that Emma was living in our house, funded with our joint credit card, facilitated by David's lies about his schedule. I drove home in a daze, my mind struggling to process what I'd witnessed. When I pulled into our driveway, Emma's car wasn't there. Of course it wasn't. She was at the hotel with my husband, probably in a room paid for with our money, pretending to be the woman she'd once been when they were married. I went inside and sat at the kitchen table, staring at the folder full of evidence I'd collected. Email exchanges that showed emotional intimacy, financial records that proved deception, and now my own eyewitness account of them meeting at a hotel in the middle of the afternoon. My phone buzzed with a text from David. Meeting running late. Don't wait up for dinner. The casualness of the lie was almost insulting. He was probably lying next to Emma right now, texting his wife with the same fingers that had just been touching his ex-wife's skin. I texted back, "Okay, love you." Even now, even knowing what I knew, I couldn't bring myself to confront him over text. Some part of me still hoped there was an explanation, still wanted to believe that the man I'd married wouldn't do this to me. At 7 o'clock, Emma came home. I heard her car in the driveway, heard her coming through the front door with that casual confidence she always carried. She appeared in the kitchen a few minutes later, looking slightly flushed but otherwise normal. "Hey Mel," she said, heading for the refrigerator. "How was your day?" I studied her face, looking for signs of guilt or deception. Instead she looked satisfied, almost glowing. She looked like a woman who'd spent the afternoon, being thoroughly satisfied by someone who knew exactly how to please her. "Fine," I said. "Yours?" "Oh, you know, running errands, catching up with friends. The usual." The lies came as easily to her as they did to David. They'd probably coordinated their stories, made sure their alibi aligned. They'd probably laughed about how naive I was, how trusting, how easy it was to deceive me in my own home. "David's working late," I said, watching her reaction. "Poor thing," Emma said, just as she had that morning. "He works so hard. I worry about him sometimes." The performance was flawless. She expressed concern for David while knowing exactly where he was and what he was doing. She played the role of the caring friend, while actively participating in his betrayal of our marriage. "Maybe you should make him something special for dinner tomorrow," Emma continued. "He always loved when you cooked for him." The suggestion that I should cook for my cheating husband, offered by the woman he was cheating with, was so audacious I almost laughed. "Almost, that's a good idea," I said instead. That night I lay awake waiting for David to come home. He arrived at almost midnight, slipping into bed quietly, probably assuming I was asleep. His hair was damp from a recent shower, and he smelled like unfamiliar soap, expensive and floral. He smelled like Emma. I pretended to sleep while he settled beside me, but my mind was racing. Tomorrow, I decided, I would start planning my next move. I had evidence now, proof of what was happening. The question was what to do with it. I could confront David directly, but that would give him a chance to deny everything, to gaslight me into believing I was imagining things. I could confront Emma, but she was so skilled at manipulation that she'd probably turn it around on me somehow. Or I could do what the woman in that other story had done. I could expose them both, publicly and undeniably, in a way that left no room for lies or excuses. The thought was both terrifying and exhilarating. For months I'd been the accommodating wife, the understanding partner, the woman who put everyone else's comfort before her own truth. But that woman had been played for a fool, and I was tired of being her. Over the next few days, I watched David and Emma more carefully, cataloging their interactions, documenting their lies. David continued to claim he was working late while meeting Emma at the hotel. Emma continued to play the grateful houseguest, while conducting an affair with my husband in rooms paid for with my money. The hardest part was maintaining the facade, pretending everything was normal while my marriage disintegrated around me. Smiling when David kissed my cheek goodbye, knowing he was going to spend the afternoon with Emma. Making conversation with Emma in the evenings, knowing she'd just been in bed with my husband. But I was learning things too. I was learning how skilled they both were at deception, how well they'd coordinated their lies, how long this had probably been going on. I was learning that the man I'd married was capable of betrayal I'd never imagined, and that the woman living in my basement was far more calculating than she'd ever let on. Most importantly, I was learning that I was stronger than I'd thought, that I could gather evidence, make plans, prepare for battle without falling apart, that the trusting, accommodating woman I'd been was just one version of myself, and there were others waiting to emerge. I began to plan, carefully and methodically. I would expose them both, but I would do it right. I would make sure there was no way for them to deny what they'd done, no way for them to paint me as the jealous, paranoid wife. Sarah helped me research divorce lawyers, and I made an appointment with the best one I could find. I opened my own bank account and began transferring money, protecting myself financially in case David tried to cut me off. I documented everything, building a case that would hold up in court. But more than that, I was planning for the moment when I would finally stop being the victim in my own story. When I would stand up in front of David and Emma and everyone else who mattered and tell the truth about what had been happening in my house, in my marriage, in my life. The thought of that moment both terrified and excited me. For so long I'd been afraid of confrontation, afraid of making waves, afraid of being seen as difficult or unreasonable. But I was learning that sometimes the only way to save yourself is to stop caring what other people think. David and Emma had made their choice. They'd chosen deception over honesty, selfishness over respect, their own pleasure over the commitment David had made to me. Now it was my turn to choose, and I was choosing to fight back. I chose Saturday evening for the confrontation. David's parents were coming for dinner, something we'd planned weeks ago before I knew what I knew. His mother, Janet, had always been polite but distant with me, the kind of woman who smiled while making it clear I wasn't quite what she'd envisioned for her son. His father, Richard, was warmer but followed his wife's lead in most social situations. They arrived at 6 sharp, just as they always did. Janet kissed my cheek with her usual cool precision, while Richard shook David's hand and complimented him on something work-related. Emma emerged from the basement, looking radiant in a flowing dress that I now suspected David had bought for her. "Emma dear," Janet said, embracing her with genuine warmth that she'd never shown me. "How are you holding up?" "Better every day," Emma replied, shooting a meaningful glance at David. "I have such wonderful support." I watched this exchange from the kitchen doorway, noting how naturally Emma fit into David's family dynamic. She'd been part of their lives for 8 years during her marriage to David. I'd only been around for 2. In their eyes I was still the newcomer, the replacement, the woman who'd taken David away from Emma. Dinner proceeded normally at first. Richard discussed his golf game, Janet shared neighborhood gossip, and David played the perfect host. Emma contributed to every conversation with the ease of someone who belonged, someone who'd shared thousands of meals with these people. I served the main course while listening to them reminisce about family vacations, holiday traditions, shared memories that all predated my existence in David's life. Emma laughed at inside jokes, finished David's sentences, and generally behaved like she was still part of the family rather than a temporary house guest. "Emma, you must tell us about your job prospects," Janet said over the salmon. "Any promising leads?" I watched Emma's face carefully. She'd become skilled at deflecting this question, but tonight felt different. Tonight her confidence seemed higher, like she had a secret she was dying to share. "Actually, I've been thinking about taking a different direction," Emma said, glancing at David. "Maybe something more creative, more flexible. Life's too short to be stuck in corporate drudgery." "That sounds wonderful," Richard said, "having the freedom to explore your passions." "Exactly," Emma beamed. "Sometimes you need to be brave enough to pursue what really makes you happy, even if it seems unconventional." The subtext was clear to anyone paying attention. Emma was talking about pursuing David, about being brave enough to go after what she wanted regardless of conventional boundaries like marriage vows. "Speaking of unconventional," I said, setting down my fork, "I've been doing some exploring of my own lately." David looked at me with mild interest. "Oh, what kind of exploring?" "Well, I've been learning about digital communication, for instance. How much of our lives we leave in electronic trails, without really thinking about it." Emma's smile faltered slightly. David's expression remained neutral, but I caught the way his hand tightened around his wine glass. "That sounds fascinating," Janet said politely. "It really is. For example, did you know that browsers keep detailed histories of every website you visit? And that email servers maintain records of every message sent and received?" "I suppose that makes sense," Richard said. "Everything's digital these days. It's amazing what you can discover when you start looking." I continued, pulling out my phone. "Would you like to see some examples?" David's face went pale. Melissa, what are you doing? Just sharing some interesting findings, I said, opening the folder where I'd saved screenshots. For instance, here's a fascinating email thread about feeling safe and protected. Very touching, really. I began reading aloud from David's email to Emma about being her protector, about ensuring her safety. Janet and Richard listened with growing confusion, while David and Emma sat frozen. And here's another interesting one. I continued, scrolling to Emma's message about their old apartment. Dreams about the past, feelings of belonging, wishes to recapture something that was lost. Melissa, stop, David said, his voice sharp with panic. But we're just getting to the good part, I said cheerfully. The browser history is particularly enlightening. Searches for divorce procedures, asset protection, legal separation guidelines. All very helpful for someone looking to end a marriage. Emma found her voice first. Melissa, you're taking things out of context. David was just helping me understand my options with Marcus. Were you? I asked David directly. Because according to your search history, you spent considerable time researching how to expedite divorce proceedings, how to maintain spousal support, how to protect assets during separation. That's pretty detailed help for a casual favor. Janet looked between her son and Emma with growing alarm. David, what is she talking about? Instead of answering his mother, David turned to me with anger. I'd rarely seen from him. You went through my personal files, my private communications. That's a violation of trust, Melissa. Trust, I repeated, almost laughing. Let's talk about trust. I pulled out the printed credit card statements and spread them across the table like playing cards. The Grand View Hotel, charged to our joint account. La Bernardin Restaurant, our money. Tiffany and Company, $800 of our money. All on days when you told me you were working late. Richard picked up one of the statements, his business mind immediately grasping the implications. Son, these are some expensive work meetings. They weren't work meetings, I said when David remained silent. Would you like to tell them what they were, or should I? Emma stood abruptly. I think there's been a misunderstanding. Maybe I should go downstairs and let you all work this out. Sit down, Janet commanded, and Emma sat. Janet Morrison might be polite, but she was also formidable when she sensed scandal threatening her family's reputation. David, Richard said, his voice heavy with authority, what exactly is going on here? David looked trapped, his eyes darting between his parents, Emma and me. Finally, he tried the approach that had worked for months. Melissa's been under a lot of stress lately. She's been feeling insecure about Emma staying here, and I think she's reading more into innocent situations than actually exists. Innocent, I repeated. Is that what we're calling hotel meetings in the middle of the afternoon? You followed me? David's voice cracked with disbelief. I followed my husband, yes, and I watched him meet his ex-wife at a hotel. I watched her arrive 20 minutes after he did, dressed for a date. I watched them both lie to me about where they'd been. The silence that followed was deafening. Janet's face had gone white, while Richard looked like he was calculating damage control. Emma stared at her hands, finally unable to maintain her confident facade. David, Janet said, her voice deadly quiet. Please tell me this isn't what it sounds like. Mom, it's complicated, David began. It's not complicated at all, I interrupted. Your son has been having an affair with his ex-wife while she lives in our basement. He's been using our joint credit card to pay for their romantic interludes, while lying to me about working late. They've been conducting their relationship in my house, with my money, behind my back for months. That's not entirely accurate, Emma said, finally speaking up. David and I have a connection that goes beyond simple friendship. We were married for 8 years. You can't just erase that history. No one's asking you to erase it, I said, but you can stop actively rebuilding it in my house. We weren't trying to hurt anyone, Emma continued, her voice taking on that vulnerable quality that usually worked so well with David. Sometimes love doesn't follow convenient timelines. Love, Janet repeated, looking at Emma with disgust. You call this love? Deceiving his wife, manipulating both of them, destroying a marriage. Our marriage was already in trouble, David said desperately. Melissa and I, we've been growing apart. Emma just helped me realize what I was missing. The words hit me like physical blows, but I'd been preparing for this moment. Growing apart. Is that what you call it when you stop investing in your marriage? Because you're too busy investing in your ex-wife. You don't understand, David said. Emma and I, we have a foundation that you and I never developed. We understand each other in ways that— Stop, Richard commanded. Just stop talking before you make this worse. David, Janet said, her voice shaking with fury. I raised you better than this. I raised you to be a man of integrity, not someone who betrays his wife while accepting her hospitality for his mistress. Emma isn't my mistress, David protested. Then what is she? I asked. Because she's not a house guest anymore. House guests don't wear their host's clothes. House guests don't meet their host at hotels. House guests don't plan their host's divorce while living in his basement. Emma finally broke. Fine, she said, standing again. Yes, David and I have reconnected. Yes, we still love each other. We never should have divorced in the first place. We're meant to be together, and my feelings don't matter, I asked. Your feelings matter, Emma said with fake sympathy. But you can't force someone to love you when their heart belongs to someone else. Their heart, I repeated. David, is that true? Does your heart belong to Emma? David looked around the table at his parents' horrified faces, at Emma's expectant expression, at my calm determination. He was cornered and we all knew it. I never meant for this to happen, he said finally. But yes, being with Emma again made me realize what I'd lost when we divorced. She understands me in ways that I don't, I finished. Well, at least now we're being honest. I stood and began clearing plates with steady hands. Emma, I'd like you to pack your things and leave tonight. David, you can choose whether to go with her or stay here, but you can't have both. I'm done sharing my husband. Melissa, wait, David said, reaching for my arm. We need to talk about this rationally. I am being rational, I said, pulling away from his touch. I'm rationally choosing not to subsidize your affair anymore. I'm rationally deciding that I deserve a husband who actually wants to be married to me. But where will Emma go? David asked. And the concern in his voice for her comfort over our marriage said everything. That's not my problem anymore, I said. You two are adults. You can figure it out together. Janet stood as well, her composure returning as she processed the situation. David, you will come home with your father and me tonight. Emma, you will leave immediately. This family will not be associated with this kind of scandal. Mom, you don't understand, David protested. I understand perfectly, Janet said coldly. You've humiliated your wife, disgraced your family, and shown yourself to be a man without honor. The least you can do is remove yourself from this house, and let Melissa begin rebuilding her life. And if I choose Emma? David asked. Then you choose the consequences, Richard said grimly. Professional, financial, and social consequences. Your reputation in this community is already damaged. How much more damage you want to do is up to you. Emma looked around the table, finally understanding that her comfortable situation was ending. David, we can start over. We can be happy together. Can you? I asked. Because your relationship has been built on deception and betrayal. What happens when the excitement of the forbidden affair wears off? What happens when you're just two people who already failed at marriage, once trying to make it work again? David's face showed the conflict playing out in his mind, the fantasy Emma offered versus the reality of losing everything else in his life. I need time to think, he said weakly. No, I said firmly. You need to choose right now, tonight. Either you're my husband and Emma leaves, or you go with Emma and I file for divorce tomorrow. The ultimatum hung in the air like a challenge. David looked at Emma, who was watching him with desperate hope. He looked at his parents, who were regarding him with disappointment and shame. Finally he looked at me, and I saw something I hadn't seen in months. He saw me, really saw me, not as an obstacle to his happiness with Emma, not as a complication to manage, but as the woman he'd married, the woman he'd vowed to love and honor. Emma, he said quietly, you need to go. Emma's face crumpled. David, no. We love each other, we're meant to be together. Maybe we were, David said, not looking at her, but I made a commitment to Melissa and I've broken it badly enough already. So that's it. Emma's voice was shrill with disbelief. You're choosing her over us? I'm choosing to try to repair the damage I've done instead of running away from it, David said. Emma looked around the table one more time, searching for an ally, finding none. Finally, she straightened her shoulders and walked toward the stairs to the basement. "I'll pack my things," she said with as much dignity as she could muster. After Emma left, after the awkward goodbyes and strained promises to work through things, David and I sat alone in our kitchen. The house felt different already, lighter somehow, like a weight had been lifted. "I'm sorry," David said, and his voice was broken. "I'm so sorry, Melissa. I don't know how to make this right. I don't know if you can," I said honestly. "Trust is easy to break and hard to rebuild." "Can we try?" he asked. "Can we go to counseling, work on this together?" I looked at my husband, really looked at him, and saw the man I'd fallen in love with underneath the stranger who'd betrayed me. "It would be a long road back if we could even find our way." "We can try," I said finally. "But David, if you ever lie to me again, if you ever betray my trust again, I won't give you another chance." He nodded, understanding the gravity of what I was offering. "I won't. I swear to you, I won't." 6 months later, I stood in the same kitchen making coffee in the morning quiet. David had moved back into our bedroom after 3 months of counseling and slow rebuilding. Emma had moved to another state, starting over somewhere David couldn't follow. It wasn't perfect. Trust was still fragile. Conversations still carried the weight of what had happened. But we were working, fighting for our marriage in ways we should have done before Emma ever entered our basement. I heard David's footsteps on the stairs, and turned to smile at him. A real smile, not the performed ones from before. We still had work to do, but we were doing it together honestly, without secrets hiding in the basement. The house was ours again, and so was our marriage. The therapy sessions were brutal in ways I hadn't expected. Dr. Richardson had kind eyes but an unflinching approach to truth that left both David and me raw after every appointment. We sat on opposite ends of her beige couch for the first month, the space between us feeling like an ocean. "Melissa, what do you need to feel safe in this marriage again?" Dr. Richardson asked during our 4th session. I thought about the question for a long time. Safety wasn't just about David not cheating again, it was about rebuilding something that felt solid. Something I could trust. "I need transparency," I said finally. "Complete access to phones, emails, bank accounts. I need to know where he is and who he's with. I need him to choose our marriage every single day, not just when it's convenient." David shifted uncomfortably. "That sounds like a prison sentence." "No," Dr. Richardson said gently. "That sounds like accountability." "David, you broke something precious. Melissa gets to set the terms for how it's repaired." The first few months were exhausting. David handed over his phone every evening, shared his calendar, called when he was running late. He joined me for grocery shopping, for errands, for all the mundane activities he'd previously avoided. Some days it felt like progress, other days it felt like we were playing house, pretending at intimacy we no longer naturally possessed. I threw myself into my design business with new intensity. Word had spread somehow about what happened with Emma, and I found myself inundated with referrals from women who'd heard my story. They wanted to work with someone who understood betrayal, who knew what it meant to rebuild from the ground up. "You're different," my client Rebecca told me as we selected paint colors for her bedroom. "Stronger, more decisive. I wish I had your courage." Rebecca was going through her own divorce, her husband having left her for his secretary. The cliché of it would have been funny if it wasn't destroying her life. "I'm not courageous," I told her. "I just got tired of being a victim in my own story. But you chose to stay, to work on your marriage. That takes a different kind of courage." Did it? Sometimes I wondered if staying was the brave choice, or the cowardly one. Was I fighting for something worth saving, or was I just afraid to start over? 3 months into our reconciliation, I found a letter David had written but never sent. I discovered it tucked into a book on his nightstand, his handwriting covering 3 pages in blue ink. "My dearest Emma," it began, and my heart stopped. I sat on our bed and read the entire thing, each word a fresh wound. He wrote about missing her, about wondering if he'd made the right choice, about the guilt of hurting me but also the pain of losing her. He wrote about our therapy sessions, about how hard I was working to forgive him, about how unworthy he felt of that forgiveness. "I think about you every day," the letter said. "I wonder where you are, if you're happy, if you think about what we had. Melissa is a good woman, better than I deserve, but with you I felt like myself in ways I can't explain. I don't know if that feeling will ever come again. I folded the letter carefully and put it back where I'd found it. Then I walked downstairs and made dinner, set the table, poured wine. When David came home, I greeted him with a kiss and asked about his day. How was therapy homework? I asked. Dr. Richardson had assigned us exercises, ways to reconnect and rebuild intimacy. Good, David said, but he wouldn't meet my eyes. I wrote in my journal like she suggested. His journal, is that what he called letters to his ex-mistress? That's wonderful, I said. I'm proud of you for doing the work. I watched him eat the dinner I'd prepared, watched him tell me about his day, watched him pretend that his heart wasn't still partially with another woman, and I made a decision. That night, after David fell asleep, I went downstairs and opened my laptop. I'd been keeping my own journal, documenting our reconciliation process, tracking my feelings and observations. But tonight I started a different kind of entry. I think I'm done, I wrote. Not with trying to heal, not with believing in love, but with trying to force someone to choose me when half their heart belongs to someone else. The next morning, I called Dr. Richardson and scheduled an individual session. I found something, I told her the next day, showing her photos of David's letter. Dr. Richardson read it carefully, her expression neutral but thoughtful. How do you feel about this? Defeated, I said honestly. We've been doing all this work, and he's still writing love letters to Emma in his head. What do you want to do? I want to stop trying so hard to save something that might already be dead. That's not necessarily what this letter means. Dr. Richardson said carefully. People process loss differently. Writing to someone doesn't mean he wants to act on those feelings. But it means he has those feelings. It means I'm competing with a ghost, with an idealized version of their relationship that I can never match. I'd been thinking about this for weeks. David and Emma's relationship had ended in divorce for real reasons. They'd fought constantly in their final years, according to things David had told me early in our relationship. But now, with distance and the excitement of the forbidden, he'd romanticized what they'd had. I can't compete with a fantasy, I continued. And I shouldn't have to. Dr. Richardson leaned forward. What does your intuition tell you, Melissa? My intuition, I'd been ignoring it for so long, dismissing it as insecurity or jealousy. But my intuition had been right about Emma from the beginning. It had been right about David's feelings, about the affair, about everything. My intuition says I deserve someone who chooses me completely, not someone who settles for me, because the alternative is too complicated. That evening I cooked David's favorite meal, and opened a bottle of wine. I waited until we'd finished eating, until the dishes were cleared and we were sitting across from each other with nowhere to hide. I read your letter, I said simply. David's face went white. What letter? The one to Emma. The one where you tell her you think about her every day and miss what you had. The silence stretched between us like a chasm. David's hands trembled as he reached for his wine glass. Melissa, I can explain, can you? Because it seems pretty clear to me. You're going through the motions of reconciliation while still being in love with another woman. That's not, it's more complicated than that. Is it? Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you're trying to have both of us. You want me for stability, for the life we've built, for the respectability of being married, but you want her for passion, for feeling alive, for being the person you think you really are. David put his head in his hands. I don't know how to stop loving her. The honesty of it hit me like a slap. But it was also a relief. Finally, the truth. I know you don't, I said softly. And that's why this isn't working. But I love you too, he said desperately. I do love you, Melissa. I want our marriage to work. Wanting and being able to make it work are different things, I said. David, you can't love someone completely when part of your heart belongs to someone else. And I can't keep trying to earn something that should be freely given. So what are you saying? I'm saying I release you. I release you from the obligation to choose me, from the guilt of loving her, from the exhaustion of pretending your feelings don't exist. David's eyes filled with tears. And what about us? What about the life we've built? We'll build different lives, better lives. Lives where we don't have to compromise who we are to make someone else comfortable. The conversation continued until well after midnight. We talked about logistics, about the house, about how to tell our families. But underneath all the practical details was a strange sense of relief. We were finally being completely honest with each other, maybe for the first time in our entire relationship. David moved out the following weekend. He took his clothes, his books, the things that were clearly his. Everything else we'd figure out later, through lawyers if necessary, but probably just through continued conversations. Our divorce, unlike his first one, would be amicable. We were ending our marriage not in anger but in recognition that sometimes love isn't enough. "I'm sorry," he said as he loaded the last box into his car. "I'm sorry I couldn't be the husband you deserved." "I'm sorry too," I said. "I'm sorry I tried to force something that wasn't meant to be." He hugged me then, and it felt like saying goodbye to a dear friend, rather than ending a marriage. Maybe that's what we'd always been better at being. After David left, I walked through the house, that was now entirely mine. I went down to the basement, to the space where Emma had lived for those disruptive months. I'd had it cleaned and painted, transforming it into a proper office space. But tonight I just stood there, thinking about how dramatically my life had changed. A year ago, I'd been the accommodating wife, bending myself into shapes to please everyone around me. I'd accepted Emma into my home, tolerated David's emotional affair, convinced myself that being understanding was the same as being strong. Now I understood the difference. Being understanding meant recognizing when a situation wasn't healthy and choosing to change it. Being strong meant walking away from something that diminished me, even when walking away was terrifying. My phone buzzed with a text from Sarah. "Dinner tomorrow. I want to hear how you're really doing." I smiled and texted back, "Yes, I have news." The news was that I was okay, more than okay. For the first time in years, I felt like myself again. Not David's wife, not Emma's rival, not the woman trying to hold together a family that was fracturing. Just me. 6 months later, I was sitting in my favorite coffee shop when I saw them. David and Emma, walking down the street together, holding hands like teenagers. They looked happy in a way David and I never had, that effortless compatibility that comes from truly understanding each other. I felt a twinge of something, not quite sadness, not quite relief. Maybe it was closure. They'd found their way back to each other, just as I'd found my way back to myself. My phone rang, and I answered without looking at the caller ID. "Melissa Patterson Design," I said, my new business name rolling off my tongue with confidence. "Hi, I got your number from Rebecca Chen. She said you completely transformed her space after her divorce, and I was hoping, well, I'm going through something similar, and I could use help making my house feel like home again." "I'd be happy to help," I said, pulling out my calendar. "When would you like to meet?" As I scheduled the appointment, I caught sight of my reflection in the coffee shop window. I looked different than I had a year ago. Lighter somehow, more solid, like I was finally living in my own skin instead of trying to fit into someone else's vision of who I should be. That evening, I cooked dinner for one, and ate it at my kitchen table without apologizing to anyone for the menu choice. I read a book I'd been wanting to read without interruption. I took a bath without worrying about using all the hot water. These small freedoms felt revolutionary after years of accommodating other people's needs. I was learning that being alone didn't mean being lonely, and that choosing myself wasn't selfish, it was necessary. My business was thriving, my relationships with friends were deeper than they'd ever been, and I was dating someone new. Michael was a contractor I'd met through work, someone who understood the value of building things carefully, with attention to foundation and structure. "What made you finally ready to start dating again?" He'd asked on our third date. I realized I needed to fall in love with my own life before I could share it with someone else. I'd told him, it was true. The woman who'd married David had been looking for someone to complete her. The woman I'd become understood that she was already complete, just looking for someone compatible to share adventures with. Late that night, as I was getting ready for bed in my perfectly quiet house, I thought about Emma's words from that terrible dinner. "Sometimes you need to be brave enough to pursue what really makes you happy, even if it seems unconventional." She'd been talking about pursuing David, but she'd accidentally given me the best advice of my life. I had been brave enough to pursue what made me happy. I'd pursued truth over comfort, self-respect over stability, authenticity over accommodation. I'd pursued myself, and it turned out I was worth the effort. The basement that had once housed my husband's ex-wife now contained my design studio, filled with fabric samples and paint chips and vision boards for other women's fresh starts. It was the perfect metaphor for transformation, for taking something that had once housed pain and turning it into a space for creation and possibility. Before turning off the lights, I walked through each room of my house, appreciating the silence, the order, the sense of peace that came from living authentically. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new clients, new opportunities to help other women rebuild their spaces and their lives. But tonight, I was simply grateful. Grateful for the strength I'd found, for the lessons I'd learned, for the woman I'd become through the crucible of betrayal and recovery. I'd learned that sometimes the most loving thing you can do is let someone go. That sometimes the bravest thing you can do is stop fighting for something that's fighting against you. That sometimes the path to happiness leads through the valley of profound loneliness, but that the view from the other side is worth every difficult step. Emma had been right about being brave enough to pursue happiness. She just hadn't realized that sometimes true happiness means learning to be enough for yourself, learning to choose yourself, learning to build a life so fulfilling that you don't need someone else to complete it. I turned off the lights and headed upstairs to my bedroom, to my bed, to my dreams of all the beautiful spaces I would help create tomorrow. The house settled around me with the contented sigh of a structure that was finally being used for its intended purpose, as a home for someone who belonged there completely, without compromise, without apology. In the quiet darkness, I smiled. I had won, but not in the way I'd once thought victory would look. I'd won by losing what wasn't truly mine, and finding what always had been myself. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.